Welcome back. Chapter 5. Before. I so clearly remember the first time I was touched with kindness and affection. I was at primary school in the playground, and it was midwinter. Snow had fallen, a magical occurrence in my dark, isolated world. I ran around it, copied the other kids as they scooped it up and patted it into balls. My hands soon turned numb. Gloves like the other children wore were a luxury that I didn't even know existed. When my fingers became painful, I turned away from the snowballs and sprinted the length of the playground to warm up. Even at that young age, I had learned survival instincts. But at the far end, the drain had overflowed and it was an ice rink. I went down hard. And then, from behind me, a firm pair of arms picked me up, carried me a few yards, and set me back down on my feet in the snow. "Are you okay? You took a tumble there." I looked up into the red, smiling face of one of the dinner ladies. I was fascinated by her expression. She looked so happy. In my little world, nobody smiled like that. She mistook my awe for shock at having fallen, and without hesitation, she pulled me into her arms and squeezed me close to her chest. At first, my own arms hung loosely by my sides. Then nature, or instincts maybe, kicked in and I raised them, put them around her thick middle, mimicking her pose. I had never been cuddled before. I had heard about it, seen it, watched other people doing it, but along with comfort and love, I never experienced it. Once I did, I craved it more than anything in the world. I began to act clumsy. After that first precious hug, I caught on. If I was hurt or sad or wounded, people offered comfort. I became an expert at tripping, falling, and slipping. Later, I discovered that if there was visible blood, the comfort I received multiplied. I started to cut myself. That first time, I sliced the blade of the scissors along the pad of my forefinger. The pain made me hiss. The sight of the bright red blood that dripped onto the desk was fascinating. The sharp pain dulled to a throb. I held my hand up. The red tracked down my arms. "Miss," I called. She was efficient, scooping up paper towels as she marched to my desk. She wrapped my fingers, gripped it tight so it clots and stopped bleeding, she murmured. But I didn't want it to stop. My eyes swam with tears and she put her free arm around me and pulled me close. We stayed there like that for a while, my small hands digging into her shoulders until the other kids grew impatient and bored. I walked to and from school on my own, even at 5 years old. There was only one mom at home, and in the mornings, she didn't function well enough to walk with me. When the final bell rang, it was her busiest time of day, so she didn't walk with me then either. My home was a thin house in a street filled with other thin houses. They were all joined together with a gaping black hole between every other home that led to an even thinner backyard. When I came home from school, I fitted my key in the lock, shoved the door open. It smelled and stunk most days, and stood in the hallway staring up towards the top of the stairs. There was a room there on the landing, Mummy's room, and if the door was closed, I was to wait in the backyard. Today, it was closed. It was most days, so I made my way through the narrow hall and into the tiny kitchen. Reaching up, I unlocked the back door, then sat down on the steps, still with my coat on. While I waited for my mom to be finished, I pulled off the plaster that Miss Fairfield had so kindly and tenderly put on my cut. I looked closely at it. Miss Fairfield was right. It had stopped bleeding. I heard a thump upstairs and looked at the ceiling. She would be done soon. Up on the worktop was a fork left over from last night's dinner, or maybe even the night before. I grabbed it, and with the prongs, I dug at the cut on my finger. Soon, blood was seeping out again. There was talk in the hallway now as my mother said goodbye to her friend. The front door closed and I put the fork back, now with blood on it as well as the dried and crusted clumps of potato. "Mummy," I said as she came into the kitchen. She looked down at me as though surprised to see me there and wrapped her dressing gown around her, tying the belt tight across her middle. "Look, Mummy," I said. I held up my hand, the blood trickling down to my elbow to drip on the linen floor. She grabbed it, let it go almost immediately, and moved over to the kettle. "Put a plaster on it," she said as she reached for the jar of coffee. Her words were long and slow and drawn out as she yawned. Chapter 6. Paula stood gloomily in the kitchen as she poured herself a hefty glass of gin. It was too early, way too early, really. And did she really want to be that woman? With the flick of her wrist, she tossed it down the sink and switched on the coffee maker instead. She should be excited, should be packing suitcases and choosing outfits, but Julie's harsh words were going around and around in her head. Julia was wrong. Paula wasn't losing herself. She knew exactly who she was. But on the other hand, strange things happen than a husband cheating. Paula's face grew hot at the thought of Tommy trading her in for a younger model. That was what had happened to Julie. Julie had been lucky in getting half of her ex-husband's fortune. He had been rolling in it, could afford to give it away if it meant a quiet divorce. He had willingly paid her off, despite them having no children. Paula tipped her head back. Tommy wouldn't do that. If anything happened, he wouldn't be generous. He converted his bank account in savings and bonds and stocks and shares. She would receive the bare minimum that he could get away with as a settlement. She pushed herself up away from the sink. An insurance policy was what she needed, a way to stay in this lifestyle. Accounts. Hold on. Where did I go? Did I pass her? Oh, sorry. An insurance policy was what she needed, a way to stay in this lifestyle that she had become so accustomed to. How had it come to this? Once upon a time, she'd been a woman who had a science degree, an actual degree that she had earned, and yet she had never used it. Not once had she held a job or career that showed her achievements. The promise of a life of luxury had appealed to her so much that she had simply become Tommy's wife. Idly, she wondered where her degree certificate was now and glanced at the wall in the study where the proof of Tommy's qualifications hung. She couldn't even use her degree now. If she had to find a job for herself, almost 2 decades had passed. Things would have changed, and she wasn't sure she'd be able to remember anything of what she had learned. She went up the stairs and drifted into the bathroom. Insurance policy. Before she could change her mind, she snatched her birth control pills from the cabinet shelf and very deliberately pushed the remainder of the month's tablets through a foil into the palm of her hand. One by one, she tipped them into the toilet bowl, watched as they bobbed around. And then, because it wasn't how she had planned it, because she had actually wanted this to be a mutual decision, she pulled her gaze away from the toilet. Closing her eyes, she flushed the pills away, yanking at the lever before she could change her mind. Uh-oh. Anna breathed heavily. A second scream caught in her throat. Her feet was bare and William's 2 long nails grazed her skin. Uh-oh, she got skin under his nails. She shook her leg, gripping onto the banister as she kicked out as hard as she could. Ooh, wheezed William as her foot caught him in the neck. She took advantage of the moment, wheeling backwards, feet skidding on the floorboards. Her back hit the wall and she slid down it, feeling the sweat on her face doubly faint now, and not just from hunger anymore. He spoke, but so quietly that she couldn't hear the words. She didn't want to hear him, and she turned her face away so she wouldn't have to watch his lips moving soundlessly or the plea for help in his cloudy eyes. As her breathing slowed, she realized that though the fall hadn't killed him, he was in a bad way. He wouldn't live long, but she couldn't leave him like this. He might hang on until tomorrow when his son arrived. He was strong when he needed to be. When he gripped her wrist to stop her from leaving the bed that he liked her to lie on with him. At the bottom of the stairs, he moved very slightly, and though it was barely discernible, it galvanized. I don't know. I think it's galvanized Anna into action. On her hands and knees, she scuttled over to him, gripping his shoulders and turning him fully onto his back. His eyes opened, blue orbs of confusion that were full of pain. "You're a filthy old man," she said, her voice thin and reedy. He shook his head. It wobbled on his skinny neck as he disputed her statement wordlessly. She wanted to spit more vitriol at him, but did it matter? It wouldn't change anything. Nothing had been as she had thought in the first place. Her mind drifted back to when she had started this gig, thinking that he would leave everything to her when he passed away, that she would get his house and the contents of his bank accounts. And finally, she would have the money to live the sort of life she was destined to. It had all been a pipe dream. She didn't speak to him again as she covered his mouth with one hand and pinched his nostrils tightly together with the other, pressing down on him with all the strength she could muster. The confusion cleared. She saw it as the clouds vanished from his eyes. They were blue lasers now, sharp and bright as they would have been when he was younger. His instincts to fight and survive took over, and he bucked his lower body in sudden surge of strength that nearly threw her sideways. Swearing under her breath, she clambered up and over him, pinned his scrawny bird arms down with her thighs, clamping at his airway once more, careful not to scratch his face, trying not to leave a trace of herself on him. It didn't take long, but to Anna, it felt like hours. "Girl, he scratched you. He got some skin under his nails." Outside the front of the Southampton Hotel, Paula wrapped her arms around herself as protection against the cold. She watched as Tommy walked up and down, peering into the road for the taxi that would take them to the cruise ship. As she waited patiently, thoughts crowded her head. It was a horrible thing she'd done, a terrible, awful thing. She hadn't slept since flushing the birth control pills away, had even thought about calling the doctor surgery and making up some excuse that she lost a pack and needed another prescription. Awful. Wicked. Tommy would be furious if he found out. Or would he? Her breath quickened. After all, he had booked this holiday in order for them to plan a baby, hadn't he? So, all she had done was get a head start on it. Maybe he didn't need to know what she'd done. But still, disappointed in herself hung heavy around her like a cloud. She had done Tommy a disservice, and he deserved better. It was too late now. They were about to get on a cruise ship. The time to request a repeat prescription had passed. She shook her head to dispel thoughts of her bad behavior. As Tommy approached, she turned to him with a bright smile. "What actually are the Northern Lights?" she asked. "They're electronically charged particles in the atmosphere that interact with each other," he said. "Cool, huh?" His face crumpled into a pout. "I really hope we see them." Paula frowned. "What do you mean? Of course we're going to see them. It's what this whole cruise is about." "Yeah, but they're not always there. Thousands of people do this and never see them. It depends on cloud cover. Ideally, we'll need a clear, dark night." He flashes a smile at her. "There are lots of other things happening up there, though." He glanced upward into the white sky. Paula followed his gaze, seeing nothing but clouds. Like what? Meteor showers, new moons, planets in orbit. He grinned, suddenly animated again as he spoke about his passion. The Taurid shower is our best bet. It's really unusual because it consists of two streams of debris. From his back pocket, he pulled a notepad, one that she had never seen before. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for, put his finger on a paragraph. The first stream comes from asteroid 2004 TG10. The other one comes from Comet 2P and Cake. It's actually been going on since September, but it peaks this week. Slipping the notebook back in his pocket, he rubbed his gloved hands together, still with that goofy smile on his face. She stared at him, rather shocked by the foreign language he seemed to be speaking. She had always known he took an interest in the night sky, but had no idea his knowledge ran so deep. When did he learn all of this? And rather disconcertingly, why didn't she know this about him? She recalled snippets of conversation, comments he had made, comets and stars and space stations. Was it possible he had tried to involve her in his passion over the years, and she had dismissed him out of her own lack of interest? Deflated, Paula pulled her coat tighter around her. It was freezing out here, and it would be worse on the boat. Why were they going on a cruise to the coldest place in Europe instead of a long-haul flight to Jamaica or somewhere equally hot? She'd been all for it when she thought she was going to witness these magical lights, but now there was a chance they wouldn't even see them. She stamped her feet, looked envious at Tommy's hiking boots, his feet encased in the insulating socks she brought him. Why hadn't she brought any for herself? She watched the couple walk out of the hotel and continue arm in arm down the street. Fleetingly, she wished she was wearing the woman's coat, a thick quilted puffer, instead of the Chanel-inspired one she herself had chosen. Absently, she fingered the material. It was beautiful, but far from practical. She had chosen style over function to look good, to not show her husband up, just like always. Here he is, said Tommy as the taxi rolled slowly around the curved drive. Come on. He picked up his case, expecting her to follow him, and she waited while he loaded the case into the boot. He sidestepped her, slipping into the passenger seat of the cab, and she heaved her own case up, struggling under the weight. Really, Tommy? After a moment, the taxi driver appeared, taking the case from her and flashing her a smile. She thanked him quietly and hurried to join Tommy in the warmth of the cab. It took only 20 minutes to reach Southampton Dock, and as she stepped out of the car and stared up at the Ruby Spirit, Paula forgot the biting cold. The cruise ship towered over the smaller yachts and sailing boats surrounding it, rising elegantly out of the water. It had a sleek black body with gold lettering and a red trim curving along the passenger rails. Paula took a step back and shaded her eyes from the weak sun as she tried to count the decks. My God, she whispered. She turned to Tommy, who stood to one side as the taxi driver hauled their bags out of the car. It's huge. He paid the driver and made his way over, winking as he patted at his crotch. Thanks, so I've been told, he joked. She wrinkled her nose and turned away from him. Don't spoil it, she muttered. What? Oh, excuse me. Come on, you can't say something like that and not expect. She shushed him as a porter approached. It's not appropriate to say things like that when you're about to board something like this. She jabbed a finger at the vast ship. What the fuck? Tommy said loudly. Cringing, Paula moved to stand in front of him and smiled brightly at the porter. Can I be of assistance with your luggage? He said, and Paula dipped her head, grateful that he either hadn't heard Tommy's crudeness or had chosen to ignore it. "Thank you," she replied and nudged Tommy. "The tickets?" Still with a face that held traces of his mood, Tommy handed them over. The porter studied them briefly before turning up the wattage of his smile. "The expedition suite," he confirmed. "The best suite," he emphasized. Inside her chest, Paula's heart swelled. Outwardly, though, she remained calm, as if being in a better than first-class cabin was what she was accustomed to. And that was the way it should be, she thought to herself as she trailed Tommy and the porter down the quayside to the walkway. She had spent years learning how to conduct herself, classy at all times, impeccably dressed, hairstyle, face made up, even if she wasn't planning on going anywhere. And yet Tommy, the man who had worked his way up through the perils of the stock industry, occasionally slipped into someone he'd never been. It saddened her that her every action was for him and the way he expected her to behave. "The expedition suite," announced the porter. He stood with one arm behind his back, the other braced on the door handle. Tommy and Paula came to a stop in the corridor, a moment of expectation built by the porter with professional panache. Okay, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Before he swept open the door and gestured for them to enter. Tommy, finally seeming to remember who he was, stepped back to allow Paula to enter first. She glided past him, barely able to stifle a gasp as she entered the huge open-plan cabin. Beneath her feet, her then-soiled silhouette sank into the plush cream-colored carpet. And the light! She looked up to see daylight streaming in through glass double doors, a balcony beyond them. For a moment, she imagined sitting out there sipping a cocktail from room service before remembering that it was winter and it wouldn't be all pleasant. She moved soundlessly over the floor to the doors, unable to contain a smile at the sight of the open sea. "And a welcome gift for Sir and Madame," said the porter, making a sweeping gesture to a large hamper on the table by the king-sized bed. "Do either of you have any questions?" Paula rearranged her face to an expression of cool collectedness before turning towards him. "No, it's all very lovely, thank you." She glanced at Tommy, hoping he caught the meaning in her pointed look, but to her relief, his wallet was already out, and he was pressing a small wad of notes into the porter's hand. When the door closed behind the man, Paula kicked off her shoes and ran across the room to jump into her husband's arms. "Oh, Tommy, it's such a beautiful suite." He caught her easily, allowing her to wrap her arms and legs around him for just a moment before setting her down none too gently on the floor. "I'm going to look around before we set sail," he said, pocketing the key card that the porter had left for them. "Well, give me a second. I'll come with you," said Paula. He held up a hand and didn't smile. "You settle in here. I'll be back before dinner." With that, he was gone from the room without a backward glance. "Dad, y'all just got in here and you leaving her already?" "Paula, you better wake up." The Arctic Suite was one notch down on the price list from the Expedition Suite. It was still plush, still luxurious like the Expedition Suite. There was a welcome hamper, though it was slightly smaller and only contained one bottle of champagne instead of two. Anna Massey thanked the porter, pressed a few of William's 10-pound notes into his hand, and closed the door behind him. Then finally alone, she looked around the room that would be her home for the next 10 days. $6,000 was a lot of money to spend on a holiday, but it still left her with just under $12,000, having spent the last week in a hotel in Southampton. But after the last year caring for William, letting him put his hands on her and living in his home smelling of old meat and fried food, she reckoned she earned it. The last few days had been interesting. She had surprised herself the day after she had left the terrace house, waking up and feeling the need to return to the scene of the crime. She had dressed carefully, concealing her face with a beanie hat and a scarf that covered her nose and mouth, and had taken the train all the way back to Essex. It was the same train she had escaped the house on, having decided against a taxi. Clarity had fought through the panic. What if the son demanded that William's death be looked into? What if the taxi company were contacted and said they'd given her a lift the day after the date she'd written in the goodbye card? In the end, she had slipped out of the back door, hauling 3 bags, struggling under the weight as she slunk off to the station. Lightheaded and near to collapse once more by the time she staggered onto the train that would take her far, far away from the scene of the crime. Now, there was no movement from William's house, and it was too cold for Mr. Henderson to be skulking around the front. In the cafe opposite, which she had never visited before, she ordered a coffee and sat in the window, waiting for William's son to put in an appearance. She was on her second latte when he pulled up. Even though she never seen him before, she knew immediately that this was the famous Jason. His all-around tan, the slightly shell-shocked expression on his face worn by those living in sunnier climates all year round who are forced back to the wintry Britain. He looked in a rush, and it was with spiteful satisfaction that Anna watched him stamp his feet against the cold as he rapped repeatedly on William's door. Her heart rate sped up as he bent over and pushed the flap of the letterbox to peer inside, and even from across the road, she heard his shout, a primitive yell, as he straightened up and rammed at the locked door with his big shoulders. She sipped at the coffee, running her eyes up and down the distraught man's figure. Another rugby player, she mused, treading that fine line between muscular and fat. She wondered which would eventually win. Finally, the hammering on the door brought Mr. Henderson outside. Gestures from Jason, Mr. Henderson hurrying back inside his own house to fetch the spare key that Anna hadn't realized he had. Then they were pushing at the door, Mr. Henderson clapping his hand over his mouth as it jammed against William's body, Jason shoving his way inside. The big man dropped to his knees, and the last thing Anna saw before the door swung closed was William's limp arm, the sagging skin molted a deep red. She had drained her latte, pulled her hat low and scarf high, and left the coffee shop and the horrible little street and exit for the last time to the tune of the sirens that blared out as they passed her. And now here she was, in a room that smelled of fresh paint and newness. Time to begin the next part of her life, a part she had earned. In the corridor, she heard the soft click as the door to the expedition suite closed. She skipped to her own door, put her eye to the peephole, and watched as Tommy Ellis marched away from the suite, her lips curled upwards in a smile. She could easily follow him. Even though he had turned the corner out of sight, she had no doubt she would find him in the bar. Taking a step away from the door, she smoothed down her skirt, shook out her short hair, then moved over to the mirror to scrutinize her reflection. 5 days of an intense tanning in the salon down the road from her hotel had done wonders. She slipped her fitted top off one shoulder and inspected her skin. No tan lines, just an entire sun-kissed body, golden and thinner than she had ever been. She staggered slightly and clutched at the wall, wondering if the ship was setting sail already before realizing she was lightheaded. But this was no time to eat and no time to go chasing Tommy either. No, that could wait. Well versed in the move she was planning to make, Anna knew that it was imperative she get the wife on board first. How, Sway? But the wife was enclosed in the cabin next door, and there was plenty of time for all of that. Snatching up her bag, Anna gave herself one last look in the mirror before sweeping out of the room and headed in the opposite direction to where Tommy had gone. Paula sat on the edge of the bed, staring out at the sea. This wasn't the way this trip was supposed to begin, Tommy being huffy and weird and disappearing before they even set sail. Girl, he ain't even put your bag in a taxi. What do you be? Automatically, she reached for her phone, was halfway through tapping out a text before she remembered she had pissed Julie off, and her best friend wasn't speaking to her. She tipped the phone out of her hand onto the bed. She knew why Tommy was mad, because she chastised him for his stupid dick joke at the quayside. He was worried that the porter had overheard, not worried that he'd overheard his crassness, but angry that he might have heard Paula telling him off. That was the thing with Tommy. He always worried about the wrong things. You sure you be worried about the wrong things too, Hal, but still. Had she overreacted? Probably. She usually did. Or so Tommy said anyway. Maybe she should apologize. She nodded to herself. She would. He had brought her this lovely holiday and she annoyed him before they had even got on the boat. But she wouldn't go after him yet. When his mood was black, he wasn't receptive to hearing her grovel. She would give him time and space to cool off. This was his holiday too, and God knows he deserved it, working all those hours. But she didn't want to spend however long it took him to calm down stuck in this room. As lovely as it was, she wanted to see what else the ship had to offer. She reached for the brochure next to the hamper and opened it. Her eyes immediately landed on what she was seeking. Feeling much better, thoughts of Tommy diminished. She gathered up her bag and key card and left the room. I know that's right, because who you think gonna stay in the room? By the time Paula reached the 6th deck, they had set sail. She darted out of one of the heavy doors, gasping as the cold air hit her. She almost turned back, but reminded herself of where she would be in 10 minutes did the trick. And she forced herself out onto the open air deck and over to the edge. Gripping the white railings, she watched the dock as the ship moved off. A few feet away, a family held their children aloof, gripping the kids' arms in a wave as they cheered. Suddenly sad, Paula dropped her head. It wasn't that it was a monumental moment. They weren't on the Titanic or the last Concorde, but this was still a maiden voyage, and she shouldn't have been witnessing it alone. Hitching her bag back onto her shoulder, she hurried back to pull the heavy door open and continued on to her original destination. As the sign for the spa materialized, she smiled with relief. This was her domain. This was something that was always just hers, a place where she felt at home. In the little wooden changing room, she stripped quickly down to the bikini she had put on before she left her cabin and grabbed her towel. Conscious of the elastic of her bottoms digging painfully into her thighs, she avoided the mirror on her way out. She made her way over to the lockers, frowning as she peered at them. They all appeared to be locked, and no amount of working her key card against them seemed to activate them. She looked around, realizing there was nobody else there and that this wasn't likely to change. Everyone would be up on deck. She shoved her bag on the top locker and clutched her towel to her stomach, moving down the narrow hallway towards the sauna. She could feel the heat even outside the wooden doors, and gripping the handle, she pulled it open and slipped inside. She let out a murmur of appreciation as she spread her towel out on a bench in the darkened room and sat down. This was more like it. This was what she had wanted. No, needed. Some well-being time, some time just for her, where she didn't have to sit and fret about Julie or Tommy or babies. She leaned back against the hot wood and closed her eyes. She could almost feel herself drifting off and wonder how appropriate it would be to come here several times a day. She shifted, the bench creaked, and then someone cleared their throat. Paula sat bolt upright and peered into the gloom. As her eyes adjusted, she felt the heat double in her already flushed face. Someone else was in here, and she was naked. Her first instinct was to apologize, to blurt out that she hadn't realized the sauna was occupied, but the sight of the woman in all her unclothed glory stopped her short. "Hi," the woman said, her tone friendly, her smile wide, showing even white teeth. "Hello," croaked Paula. She tore her eyes away from the woman's breasts, small and perky and so high that she was even tan underneath them. Embarrassed, she crossed her arms over her own chest, even though she was wearing her bikini. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was in here." "It's all right," the woman said. "There's more than enough room for both of us in here." She grinned at Paula, pushed herself upright, and stuck out a hand. "I'm Anna. Anna Massey. It's good to meet you." Ooh, scandalous, Anna. Just scandalous. First of all, why you got me naked? We know you got a good body. Girl, she got naked to show this man that she going after wife who bought her body. That's scandalous. Ooh. Oh, that's scandalous. Anna, you a mess. But anyway, it seemed like Tommy don't like Anna. Don't like his wife, Paula, anymore. Did she go too far with telling him to watch what he's saying and for him to be that mad that he left her alone? Like, you couldn't get over that and chill with your wife on the first day? You left her in the room? But I'm glad she got her butt up out of that room and was like, "I'm going to do me." But boom, look who she run into, crazy Anna. Okay, now I must say, I am reading another book called Dear Debbie. And I'm trying not to mix these two up, but these storylines on both of these are kind of the same. So when I'm talking about this one, I got to talk about it right away so I don't mix up my books. But yeah, I just wanted to say that. So anybody that's watching me that's also reading Dear Debbie with me, let me know if the storylines are the same. However, there was 3 words that I don't think I pronounced correctly. So I'm going to make a definition video. So stay tuned for the definition video. But I'm going to pause you and then do a definition video. So be right back. Okay, I'm back. The first word is spelled Galvanised. I pronounced it galvanished, and this is how it's pronounced.
Galvanized.
Galvanized. I don't know where I get the ish from, galvanized. I was close. Okay, it's an adjective. It is of iron or steel, coated with a protective layer of zinc. Okay, in the sentence it says, "At the bottom of the stairs, he moved very slightly, and though it was barely discernible, it
galvanized
Anna into action." That don't make sense. Made of galvanized iron or steel. No, the definitions don't seem to match. If it makes sense, let me know. Okay, let me find the next word. The next word is spelled Vitriol. I think I pronounced it vitriol, and this is how it's pronounced.
Vitriol.
Oh, I was close. Vitriol. It is a noun, cruel and bitter criticism. In the sentence, it says she wanted to spit more
Vitriol.
at him, but what did it matter? Now that one makes sense. Okay, let me find the last word. And it is spelled Panache. And I think I pronounced it panache. And this is how it's pronounced.
Panache.
Panache. Oh. It's a flamboyant confidence of style or manner. In the sentence it says, Tommy and Paula came to a stop in the corridor, a moment of expectation built by the porter with professional
Panache.
panache before he swept open the door and gestured for them to enter. And that one makes sense. So the only word that don't make sense is the first one, the still one. I'm just making sure. Okay, so that's the end of the definition video. I shall see you in chapter 7. Bye for now.